could do next was to keep this spirit, as I described in the sense of what happens to rural civilization. Even though its outward manifestation disappears, the spirit can survive if America injects it into its education system. Conquering the frontier will not be about conquering some land. It will be conquering different frontiers, conquering space, conquering the digital frontier. And it's that kind of spirit that we see indeed in the higher educations of the United States, and which is why from these education institutions, a large part of the innovations that have shaped our world, a large part of the ICT sector has emerged. So, what we're seeing is basically, to sum up some different lines of what I've discussed up till now, we're seeing a global transition. From a rural civilization, we are moving everyone now into an urban context. And what that means is that we've seen that rural civilization is not something that just disappears in the modern context, but it actually, if it transforms, can infuse the modern context. And that is the vast transition that we are seeing now. A few billion people more will, in the coming decades, in the course of our lifetime, will change their rural civilizations and their whole histories, will transform them and project them into the modern world in which we are now living. All kinds of themes from history will re-emerge in this new urban context. And is that something that we have to be prepared for? One field specifically in which I think it's interesting to get yourself acquainted with how this dynamic will work is actually something that you can see if you look at movies. It's interesting not just to look at the blockbuster movies in Hollywood, but it's actually quite nice to look at what are the blockbuster movies in many of these emerging countries. Actually, what we're seeing in different types of movies now, emerging throughout countries like China, India, Turkey as well, is that all kinds of historical themes are giving new life because these countries are getting a new impulse as they enter the modern urban world. Recently, I was in a video store and I saw a movie, and it looked like a typically Hollywood movie in the tradition of movies like Troy and Lord of the Rings, a good action movie, the type of movie I like. But it was titled 1453, which kind of puzzled me. Liking history, I knew that 1453 was the year that the Turks conquered Constantinople, and I wondered which Hollywood filmmaker would make a movie about that specific history. It turned out it didn't. There wasn't a Hollywood maker who made it. It was a Turkish movie. But it was a Turkish movie that had all the power and all the special effects of a Hollywood movie. But what the movie showed basically was the reverse of the view that we've become accustomed to in the media now. We've often seen movies in which, for instance, a movie like 300, in which the Persians are seen as a decadent population. Iranians claim about it, and many people say, it's just a movie, don't worry about it. But I advise you to look at these movies from developing countries, in which their view of events and their view of the West is given back to you in the reverse way. So what the movie 1453 shows is basically how the decadent Christians that ruled Constantinople, no morals, everyone was corrupt. And then the virtuous and brave Turks came in, conquered it, had a historical role in bringing Constantinople into the world of Islam. And it does give us insight in what way the old Turkish civilization is re-emerging, but now in the world of Hollywood. China, similarly. Look at several of China's blockbuster movies, even kung fu movies. Movies like Hero, Once Upon a Time in China, Confucius. Seem all very entertaining. They all seem like they're just about entertainment. But the themes underneath, we're seeing old historical motives re-emerging. Movies about how the past 200 years for China have been 200 years of humiliation, 200 years of weakness, and now China is re-emerging again. There are these kind of themes that this transition to the new urban world is bringing, is going to change the way we have to view the world. With these countries emerging, they will have different perceptions on what the world is like and what role we and they fulfill in that world. Another interesting example in that case is indeed the Kung Fu movie Hero. It's a movie which seems all about just amusement, but underneath the movie actually is an old historical tale that tells that secession is the start of chaos. The movie is actually a thinly veiled warning against Tibet and Taiwan that if they secede, they will plunge the country into chaos. And it's these type of emotions that are now emerging in the modern media world that we all have to become accustomed to. So just before I round up with a few general points on what we can better do to, and especially US students, to be prepared for this new world, I'd like to pick up one final theme in the way this new development is taking shape. The theme, I guess, that has most often been quoted when we look at the rise of emerging countries and the urbanization of the rest of the world, and that is the rise of China. It's been mentioned in this conference a few times before already. And although I do think that China indeed has a certain force, especially if we look at it in terms of my presentation, the urbanization it still has to reach, it will be a very important economic force in the future. But there's actually a scenario in which I can imagine that in the rise of China, actually the prime relevance or the prime weight in global geopolitical relationships will actually be Europe again, as a result of China's rise. So I've just modeled this, and I'll go through it very shortly about how this scenario could take place. This basically is the often quoted clash of the coming decades. The United States as the leading world power, China as the expiring world power. And of course, the US has its traditional allies, mostly located here in Europe. China has its traditional allies, mostly located in its direct vicinity. And what we've been seeing in recent periods is because of China's growth, it's increasing its influence throughout the world. So we're seeing large parts of the world in which Chinese investments, Chinese economic development, Chinese cooperation is bringing these countries closely into China's sphere of influence. But what is often not seen clearly enough is that the West, and specifically the United States, is already reacting to that. It is already building a coalition of countries, old Cold War allies, but also new countries, coming closer to the United States, in which way it will try to seek, and is already seeking to contain the rise of China. So in the more blue-colored, we see a group of countries already emerging around China, which are increasingly becoming US allies. Japan, traditionally a US ally in the Cold War, South Korea, Taiwan as well, of course, but even countries like India and Vietnam that either did have no relationship with the US or even fought a war with the US a few decades ago, are experiencing that their fundamental existential fear is the rise of China next door. And that is now actually bringing them into the Western world, or specifically the United States group of interests. So China, of course, realizes this. It realizes that the United States, with its focus on Asia, is now kind of encircling the country. So China is, in different ways, trying to break out of this encirclement. It's trying to find its way into the broader world. And so many developments of the recent period could be understood in that light. We've seen tremendously emotional outbursts over uninhabited islands in the East China Sea between China and Japan. And there, again, we see old histories re-emerge. It's old history of Chinese-Japanese rivalry that is becoming stronger. But it's also about China seeking to break out. It's the East China Sea in which the United States have now created a ring of containment about China, which China now seeks to break out of. And that's why it needs to control parts of the East China Sea. But also that's why it's building gas and oil pipelines through Myanmar, why it's building infrastructure through Pakistan to get close to the Middle East. But actually, as interesting as these, or as important for China as these ways to break out may be, there is an interesting scenario for China that involves a different direction, and that is moving over land. It's basically this movement. China is already constructing vast railway structures through Russia, through Ukraine, directly to the European heartland. China hopes, and Europe, of course, has a strong alliance with China. Europe has a strong alliance with the United States. But China actually hopes that it might bring Europe a bit closer in its field. Many European countries, especially Germany and France, are not that comfortable with US domination of world politics. And what China would hope is to bring these countries closer to its sphere. And the US, of course, would seek to counter it. So what we'll see emerge is a struggle between both sides for the favor of Europe. Europe indeed might make the balance of global politics and geopolitics in the course of the 21st century. And the theme of what China is trying to do here is actually also an ancient theme. It's a theme that basically throughout rural civilization has developed over the last 1,000 years, has re-emerged in different forms. And it's an old dream. It's an old dream of uniting Eurasia. Indeed, creating a unification between the countries of Eurasia will combine Europe's technology, Russia's energy, and China's population. It's an attempt to create this single coherent force which has inspired the Spanish, the Habsburgs, Napoleon, Germany several times, and the Soviet Union. And it's always been England and the United States trying to attempt to break this coalition because they know that if it will succeed, it will become a powerful force, the most powerful group within the world. But what it all ends up is that it at least shows that the United States and China will battle for dominance within the global system, it is Europe, it is here where probably the most important decisions will be made in terms of the balance of power. So to conclude, what is it that we, or at least what is it that students can do to become more prepared for these large transitions that are taking place now? A few things I think that are important to look at. The first thing I think is in terms of your studies, try to work across disciplines. Within disciplines already, many of you will probably be economy students. I think what the global financial crisis has shown is that a purely quantitative, econometric view of economics is not sufficient to understand the world we're living in. As I've hoped, I've made to illustrate it with my story, is that understanding historical developments, studying history, is actually very important to understand recurrent patterns, developments that also are facing us now and will face us again in the future. Specifically philosophy, another field I'd say, is specifically a field which will help students to, philosophy in its essence has the capacity to make you wonder the strongest opinions that you hold for yourself. And I think that, in a world in which so much is changing, in a world in which the new views of emerging countries will become more dominant, will be important for us. Many things which we believe are fundamental to how society works, or how countries relate to each other, will all be turned around. And to get accustomed to being able to see the world from a different perspective and to doubt deep-seated opinions you have yourself is one of the fundamental things I think students need to learn for the future. Study abroad also, I'd say. What I've hoped to illustrate as well with some of my examples is what interesting new views are emerging throughout the world. The perspective we have, the perspective our media has, is very limited. There are interesting opportunities for students to go abroad, but also to know these different worlds, to know what is dominant in the media there, learn the languages locally. I think in the past, in my time maybe still, going abroad was something just for fun, something extra. But I'd say with the vast changes that are taking place now, it's not optional. It's something actually that every student should do. Use ICT also wisely. Yeah, I think I wrote it down. I think with most technologies, both the optimists and the pessimists are right. Indeed, ICT makes it possible, it gives us a lot more information. It's possible to have much greater understanding of what is going on in the world. Lots of things that used to be stored away are now out in the open. But on the other hand, most of us, what do? We watch, we listen, we read exactly the same things as everyone else. So as a student, trying to understand, trying to get a grip on the changes taking place right now, ask yourself how many sources of news, of information do you have that your neighbor doesn't use? Don't just read the big newspapers, try to read newspapers from other countries, try to read magazines, try to read fields. All the information indeed is there, but don't use ICT just for amusement and just to find out what you already yourself know. That I think finally is what it's going to all going to be about. We need to be resilient. The world is changing in fundamental ways. Much of our views of who we are, of how global relations work, but also, as I've tried to show from this long-term perspective, how human society is organized, are changing, and they're changing in the coming few years. And that is something which we all need to be resilient against. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really a beautiful final speech, which, excuse me, hold it for me. That was really a beautiful final speech, which gave us all a real glance at the future, which is the theme of the day. Whom may I ask to put a question or make a remark after the eloquent speech you've just heard? Yes, over there. Yeah, please come to the mic.
Good afternoon. My name is Omar. I'm a student pre-master business administration. I was wondering about Technopolis. You talked about it. But isn't it actually logically that people go to the city because we live in a capitalist environment? Everything is about money. Yeah, like Marx said it, it's not about the worth of something we have, but it's about the money. Like back in the days, like you was a farmer, you had a sheep, you would sell it, so at night you could eat. But now I have money, so I sell it to create more money. And is that maybe the reason people go to the city to get a job and eventually in the hope of becoming rich? So Technopolis is something that is happening, but isn't capitalism the reason of that?
Yeah, I'd say capitalism is one of the primary drivers of it. So capitalism is one element of what I've described as Technopolis. I've tried to show it as a world in which the world exists only for us as something we can manipulate, as something we can change, instead of something that exists in itself in a natural order. So I would say that actually mirrors the distinction you made between living in the village, in which it's a real object, it's a natural environment with sheep, and towards a world in which everything is all about control, about transforming it to fulfill desires. That is what capitalism does. So absolutely, capitalism is a very important driver of this process. But why I focus so much on what I've described Technopolis within the condition of the process of urbanization is because it has its own pace, its own development. In Marx's time, the world was, even though capitalism was growing, the world was highly rural. Even, as the graph showed, even in 1950, people were drawn to cities, but it was still only a small part of the world. So it's really, that's why I've focused it more on the conditions now. We're seeing that urbanization is really now becoming a prime driver, and it's going to be completed over the next few decades. That I focused here on urbanization. But capitalism absolutely is one of the core features that drives it, and it works in different ways. It's people wanting money, which is why they leave their villages. But it's also other dynamics. One of the things that Technopolis does is that because of the technologies we have, it increases living standards. People become older. Another presentation this morning said children die less. So that means families grow. And that's also one reason why people move to the city. Villages that or farms that in the past used to be run by a few people suddenly now have twice as many people in the family. So some of them need to go to the city. So yeah, it's absolutely part of the complex dynamic. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, please go ahead.
Hi. You just mentioned the rise of China as well as Southeast Asia and their relation with the Europe. But then what do you think the role of Middle East will be in this context?
Sorry?
The role of the Middle Eastern countries will be in this context, because I mean historically as well as geopolitically, I think Middle East is also one of the most important regions in the world. And then you also mentioned that Europe, I mean some of the most important decisions are going to be made here. But I mean, what kind of dynamics will we be seeing in the coming decades in the Middle East?
Mm-hmm. Okay, two parts. The Middle East. You're right, I think the Middle East is an important part in the global geopolitical chessboard. But I do think the Middle East has, over the last few decades, become maybe the heart of the geopolitical struggle in the world. It's risen to that position, and I think now it's at its height. And it's actually, its relevance is declining. Several factors have to do with that. I mean, of course, the rise of importance in the Middle East had to do with the energy resources the Middle East has. And it's basically the link between US industry and energy coming from the Middle East that has made the global world power so much involved in the Middle East. But I think that's changing. Partly because I think some of the trends Dick Benschop mentioned this morning. Oil is probably not the field that's going to continue the largest part of the increased demand for energy. We're moving more and more towards alternatives, and that I think makes the Middle East less central. But also, especially now, very recently, we're seeing large developments within the natural gas field, and specifically the United States itself. It's opened up all kinds of new fields of natural gas, and it's actually moving towards becoming an energy exporter over the coming years. That will change the US interest in the Middle East completely. It will still be important because we will use oil and gas and we will focus on the Middle East. But I think it's actually, the importance of the Middle East is now at its height. I think in relation to other parts, mostly because of changes in the energy sector, that is evolving now. And I think the Middle East will go more towards its position it had before the rise of oil, more as a route along the Silk Route, a position along the Silk Route. So trade goes through it because it connects. It connects Europe, it connects Asia, it connects Africa. Turkey I see emerging as a country that again is moving into a dominant position within the Middle East. But within the new context in which I think China, the US and Europe will be the prime moving parts.
So I mean, in your opinion, in the future, Europe and China will be the dominant powers in the Middle East?
Within the, well, I'm not sure if it's a long-term development. Currently, the US is the US and the local countries are the prime forces there. China is not that big in the Middle East, actually. I mean, China knew that the Middle East is dominated by the US. They didn't want to have trouble there. So that's why China went other places. That's why China invested in the energy industry of Angola, why it's exploring in Mozambique. It's in other countries in which it can more easily invest and get oil from than try to get a chunk of the oil that goes from Saudi Arabia to the United States. So China is not that big there. It's mostly the US now. But the trend I see is that because of less energy dependence on the Middle East, the whole world will become less focused on it. At least we'll have less interest in fighting wars that far away in this region. And what instead is emerging is that you're seeing that local countries in the region will dominate it more. So basically the Middle East has been dominated by foreign powers since at least the 19th century when the English and the French cut it up. Now I think local dynamics are coming back. That's Iran is expanding in the region, but on the other hand, Turkey is also becoming more powerful. I think the Arab Spring was about that. The Arab Spring was about the Middle Eastern populations trying to rule themselves instead of being on the sidelines of history.
Indeed. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Speaking about Turkey, I think it's interesting you mentioned Turkey as a future important country power in the Middle East. So you see Turkey more as a part of the Middle East than as a European country. And do you think that Turkey will ever become a member of the European Union? And it's not the classic approach. Do you think that the European Union will ever agree on the entrance of Turkey? But do you think that Turkey is still interested in becoming a member itself?
I don't think Turkey will ever become a member of the European Union. At the same time, I think it's not something. I think what was becoming increasingly more clear is that Europe will not agree to it, and indeed, as the thing you're mentioning now, I think Turkey is becoming increasingly less interested in. Mm-hmm. That will not mean that we'll stop the process. I think we'll continue with the process. It has very beneficial effects on Turkey, and actually, the current Islamist regime in Turkey is very keen on preserving relationships with the European Union and working towards convergence because it's important for their own position in their society. Turkey now, since Erdogan came to power, for the first time has a party that has Islamist roots. It had a secular elite before that, and that controlled the country through the military. By saying we need to gain access to Europe, the political party has the power to keep the military out of politics, because military intervention goes against European rules. So that's why I think Turkish pronunciations or Turkish public declarations will all be about we need to work more towards European integration. But I think in itself, Turkey is not that more interested in it. Turkey is really a country that has been in trouble with itself since 1920 when Ataturk transformed the country, and it's been trying to find a place for itself in the modern world. And I think currently that's just emerging. Currently seeing Turkey as a country that both has a modern economy as well as a good relationship towards its own traditions. And then I think, especially Turkey, it's important to realize what potential the country has. I didn't have a map of it here, but Google the range of the Ottoman Empire, an empire that existed until the First World War. I'm not saying that's a natural sphere of influence of Turkey. I'm not saying they're going to dominate all the way to Libya, Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, and the Middle East. But as a society, it has, being at the crossroads of the region, it will expand its influence there. It's doing in the Arab Spring, it's in dealing with Iran. Everywhere it's increasing its influence. So I think that is where Turkey's focus will be. But maybe we have a political response to that.
If you would like to say something about it, Marije.
Oh, you're coming up here.
No, I'll stand here. This is your moment in the sunshine. Of course Turkey will become a member of the EU. It will take a while, though. But basically, as EU, we need Turkey much harder than they need us. We need their workers. With the aging society, even a European labour market, even all the Romanians and Bulgarians that we can get will not be enough. We need Turkish workers. As has been so eloquently explained, they will have a great geopolitical power in the area. We need that. We want that. We want that in the EU. And we are working on it. The Council of Ministers is blocking the negotiations with Turkey for all kinds of eternal electoral reasons of France and Germany and the Netherlands. But meanwhile, we've of course started negotiating. The European Commission is now saying for each of the negotiating chapters to Turkey, if the negotiations would start, then this would probably be the things that you would have to do. And basically Turkey has started on the whole technical process. And once they have finished that, it'll be 10, 15, 20 years from now. We'll probably have had quite a number of elections here, and hopefully there'll be some governments that can see some sense in EU countries.
Thank you.
Yeah, what you've clearly shown is that Europe has an interest in Turkey joining. Yes, so it's its workers and its economic dynamism and its geopolitical relevance to the region. I'm just not sure it's in Turkey's interest anymore. And I think I have a strong reason why they follow all these procedures. It works for their economy very well, and it helps them to keep the military and all kinds of people outside of their politics. But if you look at all the action already in the last few years, I mean, Turkey used to be all about how do we deal with Europe. What has happened in the last few years? We've had the flotilla affair with Israel. Turkey very much involved in Syria. As soon as a government was toppled in the Arab Spring, the first thing Erdogan would do was jump on a plane and go there. It's changing relations with Iran, with the whole region. Turkey is really focusing on a different region, and I think it will want to trade a lot with Europe. So absolutely, ties, I think, are there and will be increased. But I think for an emerging country with such potential in its direct neighborhood, the reasons to subsume yourself into a larger political structure, I think, are not that strong.
Thanks a lot. I think indeed that this is a very interesting moment to wind up our meeting. I thank you very, very much. You get the flowers and the other things you deserved. Which means that we've come to the end of this conference. Time goes fast, and I think we've come to the end of this conference in a very interesting way, a discussion between the two last speakers we had. And that's also a good thing, to have interaction between the speakers of the day, as we had just now between Haroon and Marije on the Turkish position. I'm not going to wind up, but I must say, as a chairman, I'm very happy with the day. I started with a few remarks myself, and I said that I was worried during the last few years about the inward-looking attitudes and policies of our country, of our government here in the Netherlands, and more or less a isolated position of the Netherlands. Maybe I was and am exaggerating, but there was a very inward-looking trend. And I also said that I was hopeful because of the program of the present government of the Netherlands, where you see a much more outward-looking orientation. And I'm happy with this day because one thing was underlined by everyone, from the mayor of Amsterdam through the member of the European Parliament to Mr. Haroon Sheikh, that we are part of a big world, and it's not even a question, is the Netherlands part of the world, and is the Netherlands participating? No, is Europe part of that world? Is Europe participating? And what's the role of Europe? And not anymore what's the role of the Netherlands. Of course it's important, we live in the Netherlands, but we are part of a greater whole, and that was really the main theme in every speech and every introduction which has been made today. And of course, that was the orientation of the day, because it was the well-chosen theme of the day by the conference committee, a glance at the future, here at this Amsterdam Academic Conference number 10. And on behalf of the committee, I'm very grateful to all the speakers of the day. Some of them, 3 of them are still here. The ones of the morning will be somewhere in the Netherlands, and I ask you to give all of them an applause, that also the 3 or 4 speakers of the morning can hear your applause at this moment. And there are also other people who deserve a big applause, and I would like to invite them to come to the rostrum, to the podium now, and that's the congrescommissie de congrescommissie van het 10e Amsterdam Academic Conference, the conference commission. And I ask them to come here. Under the leadership of Anke, I would like to ask you, and you already gave it, to give them another applause. And yes, go ahead. And to thank you very, very, very much. And I must say, very personally, I'm quite often chairman of student conferences, and it has really been a great, great pleasure to work with your commission. You really did a great job. You went and we went through some difficult moments, and together we found a very good solution. Thank you very, very much again, Erik Wilders. And allow me to mention one person in the commission, because she was the one with whom I worked, and I think that work, from my view, for my part, that work was very constructive, and not only constructive, not only good, but also very pleasant. And that's Aniek. So my personal applause for Aniek. And now it's a bit painful moment, because you had the dilemma, because you can't give yourself flowers, but you deserve flowers. And I think the yellow flower you've got here is the symbolic flower you have already got. So that's for you. That's the end. It was my pleasure to be your chairman. On behalf of the committee, I invite you for drinks in the lobby, and I ask you to put your badges back somewhere where you can put them back. Thank you very, very much.